Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this. My name is Juancho Moreno. Joining me, we have Nino Moreno and Kyle Ong. Today, we will be presenting our presentation on sports analytics, the PBA versus the NBA on their different player archetypes. Now, without further ado, let us jump right ahead into the introduction, introducing why we chose basketball to analyze in the first place. So now, as we all know, the basketball industry is a huge business with the NBA itself being worth roughly around 49.5 billion US dollars now. Why the PBA, why Philippines in particular when it regards to basketball? Well, the Philippines is a country that we all know is obsessed with basketball, with roughly 40 million Filipinos playing or having played the sport. Now, leveraging on future events, the Philippines will actually be hosting the FIBA Basketball World Cup coming up in 2023. So we thought that this project would be very much relevant and timely. Now, moving into the problem statement that ties this whole presentation together, we have two types of problem statements that we want to address. First would be the macro question that we all shared as group mates. How can data science be used to better inform PBA stakeholders? And second would be the micro question. So we wanted to answer the macro question by answering the micro question first. What types of PBA and NBA archetypes are present or can we find in the respective leagues? Now, to answer these questions, we want to hit three key objectives. First would be to identify the different player archetypes present in the PBA and NBA. And second, we want to compare these similarities and their differences to hopefully, third objective, provide meaningful insights that may be useful for our intended stakeholders, which are the PBA stakeholders. Now, talking about the data set that we used, we obtained this data from basketballreference.com and dribblemedia.com. Now, it is important to note that all of the data that we got is quantitative. So quantitative, in fact, we only got basketball statistics. So this is points per game, minutes per game, and etc. The inputs are seen in the slide here. Now, all data is from the respective 2021 seasons. We want to get the most comprehensive, most recent data that we could find. So moving on to the comparison between the leagues, we have the NBA being that it is a bigger league, it has more players and more teams. Again, it is important to note that the NBA is the world standard when it comes to basketball leagues. The PBA, on the other hand, its competition style is different. It has a foreigner cap to maintain competitiveness, and its team format is totally different as it is defined and limited by companies instead of cities. Now, moving on to how we'll answer our macro and micro questions said earlier, we have 5 steps. First is to scrape the data from the basketballreference.com and dribblemedia.com, the sites mentioned prior. Second would be to clean this data and perform an exploratory data analysis. Third would be to model this data by means of k-means, clustering, and soft k-means. Now, fourth, we'd want to analyze these results by taking a look again at their different player archetypes. And fifth, using these archetypes, we want to come up with our own recommendations. Now, taking a look at the EDA that we have, we want to show you more about the different statistical leaders in different categories of the game. So in the points per game, for the NBA, we have Stephen Curry, and for the PBA, we have Mikey Williams. Second, we have Clint Capella for rebounds per game in the NBA, and we have Christian Stan Hardinger for the rebounds, the leader in rebounds per game in the PBA. Now for assists per game, for the NBA, we have Russell Westbrook, and for the PBA, we have Robert Pollock. Now, a lesson from the EDA is that if there's anything clear, there truly are different types of players who are good at different things, who are good at different statistical categories. We noticed it's not just one person leading the charts. So to identify and delve deeper into more of the types of players, we have Kyle with a k-means clustering.
Oh, how was the optimal k-means cluster number obtained? Well, it was obtained by identifying the inertia and silhouette scores. For the NBA, the cluster number was identified as 6. It can be seen that the graphs for the inertia and silhouette scores decrease slower after the 6th cluster. A similar method was used to find the k-means cluster number of the PBA, and we identified it to be 6 clusters as well. So now we'll be moving on to the archetypes for the NBA. Just like what was previously mentioned, the NBA has 6 clusters, which means that there are 6 archetypes as well. The 6 archetypes that we identified are the role players, shooters, contract players, supporting big men, main big men, and stars. Here's a short overview of the different NBA archetypes. First of all, we'll have the role player, and these players score a fair amount of points to help the team. However, they play limited minutes and are not really effective players. So we define them as mediocre support players. Next, we have the shooters. In particular, they're excellent three-point shooters. This cluster has the second highest 3 points made, as well as the highest 3 points percentage. And they also score a decent amount of points per game. Next, we have the contract players. The players here have the lowest stats of any cluster. It's important to note that there are only 6 players in this cluster. And another thing that's important is that these 6 players all have G League contracts, which means that all of them are just borderline NBA players. Next up, we have the supporting big man. They take high percentage shots near the basket, and they have a high rebounds per game, as well as the second highest offensive rebounds per game among all clusters. However, they're less effective than the main big men cluster that will be coming up. So now we have the main big men. These players have the highest blocks per game, as well as the highest defensive rebounds per game. In general, these players are great inside players that dominate the paint. Lastly, we have the star players. They have high minutes per game, high points per game, as well as high assists. These players consist of the main core of the team.
Now, as we move over to the PBA archetypes, we can see that the PBA archetypes, on the other hand, have similar types based on shooters and bigs, but there seems to be a small difference based on how the bigs are in the PBA. Now, if we could see the supporting bigs cluster, this is actually pretty similar to the supporting bigs in the NBA archetypes. They support the team not necessarily in points, but mainly in rebounds as they utilize their size in getting the ball. Now, these are the shot takers. Now, these players are not necessarily the best players in the league, but are seen to be the ones taking the longer range shots as compared to their other co-players in the PBA. Now, the two-way big men is one of the most dominant types of players in the PBA, as they not only utilize their size for the offensive aspect of the game, such as scoring points and offensive rebounds, but also on the defensive aspect as well. Hence, the two-way big man. Now, the role players. These are the types of players that are either part of the bench team or really just supporting players to the star guards or the two-way big men. They can contribute some points, some rebounds. However, they are not the most effective players on the game and are seen as a more of support role. Now, for the underperforming players, these are the players that scored really low and saw very limited playing time. The 2 players in these clusters are the ones that saw the least amount of action in the PBA. Now, for the guard stars, these are the players that score high offensively and are focusing on the guard aspects of the game, which is scoring by shooting or some layups, and also focusing mainly on assisting and also passing, which is seen by having one of the highest assists per game in our dataset. Now, as we compare the 2 leagues, we can see that the NBA expectedly has higher stats compared to the PBA in terms of the basic stats such as points, rebounds, assists, even turnovers. We can see that there are more threes attempted in the NBA. And this is mentioned by some NBA journalists as a modern type of play by focusing on shooting within the perimeter or within a farther range, such as a 3-point area or a far 2-point area. Now, if we look at the PBA seems to have more star players that rebound more than the NBA. Now, this could be attributed to the PBA players' lack of efficiency with their shooting, making them miss more, thus resulting into more rebounds, whether defensive or offensive type of rebounds. This could be mentioned by some basketball journalists as an old school's type of playing, which is reminiscent of the old school NBA, wherein the big men tend to dominate the game offensively and defensively, and while the guards are focused on passing and assisting. Although it is important to note that in the NBA, given the star guard cluster, there is a surge that the guards have been leading the offenses as well.
With that, we have our recommendations for three key stakeholders of the PBA. First are the development coaches. We suggest that focusing on the supporting bigs cluster of the PBA, we suggest that these development coaches take a look at building their offense as making them more like two-way bigs would surely help the chances of the team succeeding in the league. And second would be, generally speaking, we want these development coaches to focus on the shooting efficiency of players, especially those part of the role players clusters, as they tend to have low shooting efficiency. For the PBA scouts, as we mentioned earlier, there are two dominant clusters in the PBA. That is the two-way big men and the guard stars. So we suggest that PBA scouts look for versatile bigs and shifty guards like Torrance Romeo in the junior leagues such as the junior NCAA and junior UAP leagues. Moving forward, for PBA general managers, if their poor performance continues, we suggest that they drop the players in the underperforming player cluster, and we also suggest that they experiment on plays that encourage more threes, as there's an abundance of shooting specialists in the league or shot takers in the league. So we'd want the general managers to leverage on that, hopefully. So now we conclude. In conclusion, we have to track back a bit and go back to our micro question, which was what types of PBA and NBA archetypes are present in the league. I think we've successfully answered that with the archetypes seen here. Now, with regards to the macro question, how can data science be used to better inform PBA stakeholders? We wanted to actually shift that conversation to you guys since we're all data scientists here. Am I right? We want to scratch that and actually turn it into a question of how can data science be used to better inform sports in general. Now, by using that challenge, we actually want you to try it out for yourselves. So we'll leave you guys with that. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for listening. And we have been Team Duncan. Thank you.